Today, we are digging into another look at peer power. We're really talking specifically about something Katie has a lot of expertise in, which is the formative assessment process, and then using social studies as the lens to look at that. She's going to make some very interesting connections. You can see one way to get in contact with her there is she's Katie at the Core Collaborative. For those of you who don't know Katie Smith, she's a wonderful person to talk to and be around, but also she's a thought leader and consultant with the Core Collaborative. She's a lifelong educator and an administrator right now, and she's an author of Chapter 14 of Peer Power, which you can actually see. She's a little embarrassed about this, but I love that when she moved, when we were working on lighting, you can see the Peer Power poster right behind her. So we got to be proud. But anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this piece. I want to jump right in. So my first question for Katie is, you spent so much of your educational career working with social studies. What drives that passion? What makes you care so much about social studies?
Well, social studies has been super important for me from the get-go. One of the things that was really important to my dad was all the historical signs that you pass on the interstates, and we have literally pulled over and read every one. Not to mention all of our family trips were always around a historical site. And so here you see the picture of Valley Forge, and I vividly remember when I was 7, my dad took us to Valley Forge because we lived outside of Philadelphia, so this was not a long drive, but it was probably 15 degrees outside, and we had to walk the entire encampment like the soldiers did so we could feel how cold it was for them in 1777. So those are the kinds of things that I just became really comfortable with growing up, and learned their relevance and significance to making, informed citizens that we want today.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful. I know I think it was at ASCD one evening we were talking just about our families and home lives and things, and it was so interesting to hear that we had some of that in common. My mom, when we went on vacation, it was always an educational vacation. She was an educator as well, but I don't think we got as deep as you guys did. But how cool that that experience led to this lifetime.
It did.
And so I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this, but why is it so important for students to learn social studies? You spoke to your passion for it and how that started young, and you've had this positive reinforcement, but why does it matter for everybody else?
Well, we really want to make young people informed citizens. And if they're informed citizens, right, they'll help create a interdependent world, a democratic society, and, really learn to respect people of different perspectives, and make positive change by learning from the past. Mm-hmm. So we don't repeat mistakes.
Yeah, and I know you really love this quote from the National Council for Social Studies, which I hid for a minute. But that's so powerful. So just talk for just another second. What does that mean to be like an informed citizen and to be able to build the society together? Like how do kids now go out in the world and do that?
Well, to be an informed citizen, you have to know how to find information, how to determine if that information is reliable and credible, and then know how to use that information to either achieve a goal, to answer a question, or to make change. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about informed.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously this is this is good timing to be talking about this. And so you are an author on Peer Power, and I know you spend a lot of your time coaching impact teams and working with the great educators in your own school. But why is it that you have this focus on empowered learners? What drives that? What do you mean by an empowered learner, and why is this why is this worth our time and energy?
Well, I think ultimately when we think about what we want to create in terms of our students, what kind of students we want to cultivate, it winds up being an empowered learner. And by that, I mean students that take ownership of their learning, that can answer those three formative questions: where am I headed in my learning, where am I now, and where to next? Students that can self-regulate and self-advocate, and who really know, right, how
Mm-hmm.
to ultimately achieve a goal. And I think that if we create empowered learners, right, these students will have empathy and acceptance of different perspectives and different opinions. So it will lead to that interdependent world that the Social Studies Council references in their purpose statement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hear, again, more connections between what it is that we want for citizens and what it is we want for learners in our schools and for ourselves.
Yeah, they're
So,
super interconnected.
mhm, yeah, which is very convenient for us. And I just threw in the chat, but we'd love for other people to share what your idea of an empowered learner is, as well as what your idea of an informed citizenry is. And those of you who are on Zoom, we now have the ability to spotlight you. So if you want to hop on, just let me know in the chat and we'll spotlight you to ask questions rather and share your thoughts. So I know I just obviously clicked this slide, but you wanted to talk a little bit about why this focus and why to spend this energy developing these skills. So this looks familiar to me.
Well, really, this gets to the why of why we want to create empowered learners. And there's tons of different bodies of research out there, but the one that I wanted to reference is the National Association of Colleges and Employers did a extensive study, and extensive research, which they published in 2019, which released the 8 critical competencies that they really found would help graduates be successful in the career world and transition to the world of work successfully. The 8 competencies you see on your screen, but many of these are directly related to concepts of an empowered learner. For example, if you look at teamwork and also social studies education, just in general. But if you look at teamwork and collaboration and you read really what this group found about it, you find that this means working with people from diverse backgrounds, respecting their opinions, leveraging your strengths against theirs, and really being able to work together to solve a problem. If you look at global and intercultural fluency and how they define that, that too has to deal with working with people from different perspectives and learning how to leverage really things from each other given the different perspectives that exist.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. And Paul's on. He says he's feeling better, and Tony's right there with him. No wonder he's feeling better. He got like a few hours of sleep last night. That must have taken care of it. And so, again, anybody who has any thoughts, please share those in. When we talk about the formative assessment process, why is it that you kind of say that if we focus on that, it takes care of everything else? Where does that belief come from, that this is so central to anything we do in school?
Well, I think ultimately, if you deeply implement the formative assessment process in the
Mm-hmm.
classroom, you are teaching students to answer those 3 questions, right? Where am I headed? Where am I now? Where to next? And we reference them in relationship to learning, but really those 3 questions can be applied to anything in life. And if students want to achieve a goal, if they want to take an action, right, that's ultimately what they need to be able to ask themselves and answer. So when we talk about empowered learners and the formative assessment process, that's what we're talking about and aiming for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Paul says in the chat, and they transfer to life. What we're doing all the time is trying to figure this out, especially as we navigate this new, as you said, you're going to hybrid soon, you know, and we're figuring all these things out. We're trying to figure out, where are we? Where are we going? What's our goal? What's our reality? And how do we change our reality to meet that goal? And so I know here we've got that quick image of Hattie's, excuse me, effect sizes. And as we've joked in the past, you don't really have to know exactly what these mean. You just have to know the bigger the numbers get, the more impact you're having. And I know there's one effect in particular that you wanted to highlight for just a moment, so I'll let you talk about that.
Well, just to recap real quick, we talked about one body of work being from the National College Association and Career Association, but the other body being John Hattie's work. And so if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a really extensive body of research in which he's done tons of meta-analyses and tried to find what the greatest impact on learning is. And basically what he found is that if a factor has an effect size of 0.4, that's a year's worth of learning in a year's time. And so anything above a 0.4 falls in that zone of desired effects. So when we talk about an empowered learner and a kid that can answer those three questions, where am I headed, where am I now, where to next, we're really talking about an assessment capable learner. And that's one of the largest effect sizes on the books. It's got an effect size of 1.33. So we can ultimately more than triple the speed of learning in a year if we can create these empowered learners or assessment capable learners.
Yeah, it's hard to justify focusing on anything else if we can triple the rate of learning. You know what? What else should we be spending our time on? And so, just wanted to say quickly, if you've got any questions out on Facebook or in the Zoom, we'd love for you to share those with us, or any thoughts you have. And I know we're going to get a little bit more into the formative assessment process itself. So as we jump into that, is there anything else, Katie, that you want to say right before we jump into the FAP?
Well, let's start to talk about the how and how we create these empowered learners. All right, so really the how comes down to this deep implementation of the formative assessment process. In answering those questions that we referred to earlier. And it starts with looking at learning progressions, right? Because first we need to get clear as educators on answering the question, where do we want our students to head in their learning? And so we can look at progressions of learning to find entry points. And a lot of state documents have progressions outlined for you, and the standards help to articulate where to enter the learning. Once the teacher has a clear vision or educator of where we want students to head, we need to help students answer the question, where am I headed in my learning? And the way to do that is by sharing the learning intentions with the students, co-creating success criteria so they know what the teacher is going to look for in the work to determine if the student is in fact successful with the learning intention, and using models where students can see what the success criteria looks like in terms of a successful piece of work. Then we get to that question of where am I now? And in order for kids to answer the question, where am I now, they need evidence-based feedback. But what makes feedback effective is the fact that it's rooted in criteria. And feedback can come from the teacher. It can also come from students to other students, or it can come from the self. And so we want to teach students how to self-assess and peer assess so they can answer that question, where am I now? But again, it must be rooted in the success criteria if it's going to be effective feedback. And finally, we get to that question, where to next? And that has to do with goal setting and revision, right? Ultimately, we want students to know that if they haven't met the learning intention yet, we can make a goal, achieve that, and revise the work. If they have, we want them to set a goal that has to do with the next step in the learning progression. If you look at all of these practices separately in relationship to Hattie's research, you will find that all of them have an effect size of greater than 0.4. But when you teach them as a process, right, the entire 3 questions and all 5 practices embedded together with discussion and questioning, that's when you really create a partnership between students and teachers, and you ultimately create those empowered or assessment capable learners that can answer those 3 questions.
Awesome, thank you. And so we had a great question about how can we apply those 3 formative questions to social and emotional learning. And I thought, man, not only is this a perfect question for right now, as we know many kids are experiencing trauma, that's always true, but it's true to a greater extent right now, but also because social studies in so many ways is also intertwined with knowing ourselves, knowing others, and as you started with, empathy. So what are your thoughts on that? And anybody else in the chat too, jump in or raise your hand and we'll add you to the video.
Well, in the state of Illinois, we have 3 social emotional learning goals that kind of dictate everything for us. The first one has to do with self-management and self-awareness, which goes hand in hand with the concept of an empowered learner that can self-advocate. And as we talked about, the social studies purpose statement from our National Social Studies Council has to do with informed citizens. So part of being informed is being able to be self-aware and to self-regulate, and also to be able to manage your emotions. So this fits hand in hand with the social studies curriculum. And there's lots of opportunities to embed mindfulness, breathing techniques, various things that can get at self-management, self-awareness into the social studies curriculum. Additionally, goal setting falls into goal 2 of the social emotional learning standards in Illinois. So that fits hand in hand with one of the core practices of the formative assessment process.
That's an amazing answer. And one of the comments is smooth because you just transitioned right into it. And it's making me think almost like, if I pick an example for myself from what you said, I sometimes get anxious, especially as we spend all day in the computer, we get kind of boxed in. And so then if I can know I'm feeling that anxiety, or I'm feeling like a little frustrated, or I'm getting a little afraid, and then I can think, where do I want to be? Well, I want to be back in productive mode, or I want to be back calm. What can I do? Well, okay, I can do some breathing. And even though I'm just pretending that time, that really did just, it does work. And so when we have that self-awareness, like you began with, we can do that. And what a powerful connection and a great thing to do. I need to make a little sticky note as soon as we're done. This says SELFAP. And we had another question, and then I know we're going to jump into some examples, but what are some of the ways, as you kind of start this process, oh, just knocked a lamp over, that, that you can model learning?
You can model learning. Well, you'll model learning throughout the process with each core practice that you embed. And I definitely have some examples to show you of that in just a second here.
Awesome. And I'm thinking, you know, even in video I've seen of you and others, when you kind of do that think aloud about a moment where you had that challenge and you had to learn something and the steps you went through, or when we do impact teams and we share our own story, you know, our own peak experience, which really leads into efficacy. Well, cool. Well, I will share your next little segue as we jump in. And so get us started here. Why are we talking about peer power, and what's this example that you want to talk us through?
Sure. So peer power references how to engage students in the formative assessment process in all different disciplines. Chapter 14 is the chapter that I had the privilege of authoring, and it is about social studies. So today I'm really going to kind of walk us through an example around the recurring skills of teaching students how to analyze sources, both primary and secondary, and how to get them ready for argumentative writing.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I've got a real passion for literacy. So when I read these, you know, where this is going, I'm seeing it through the literacy lens. So why is it that in social studies, I get the analyzing sources, but why are you focused on argumentative writing?
Well, in social studies, literacy, whether it be speaking, writing, reading, that is the vehicle for delivering our content. So argumentative writing is absolutely essential to our craft.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so in regards to this example that I want to walk you through, as an educator, one of the first things that your team of teachers, right, has to do when you're teaching a curriculum is talk about what skills are you going to teach the students and where exactly do you want them to head in their learning. So when I look at this example specifically, I'm going to talk about an AP class, AP European History specifically in high school. And so there are lots of standards that are intertwined in teaching an AP course. You've got the Common Core literacy standards. You've got these state standards from whatever state you're coming from in regards to social studies specifically, which for me is Illinois. And then you've got the practices outlined by the College Board, which will inevitably wind up on the student summative assessment, which they're taking for college credit. So I reference here all of the different standards or AP practices that have to do with argumentative writing and analyzing sources. And ultimately, you want to get really clear on the expectations of all these standards and practices so that you can make the students clear. And one of the easiest ways to assess a student's ability to write argumentatively and support it with evidence, specifically sources, right, from primary and secondary sources, is through a document-based question. So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
And for anybody who doesn't know, that's what that DBQ was, because I had to ask.
So now once the teacher or educator is clear with where they want their students to head, it's time to make the students clear and where they're headed in their learning. And in social studies, we've got this overarching, especially in an AP class, concept of writing that we have to get the students ready to do on their AP assessment. So one of the learning goals that fits with every single unit, despite the content that we're teaching, is that we want students to be able to analyze sources in order to effectively write a document-based question. So at the onset of the year, we really encourage students to share that learning target with us. And by that, I don't mean just posting it on the board, but I mean really engaging students in the concept of, what does this mean? And so I love to share the quote, Rome wasn't built in a day, and ask students to go ahead and discuss that in pairs and what exactly that means, and then have a conversation around how that relates to our learning goal. And basically big achievements, right? Things that are ambitious take a lot of time, and usually collaboration as well.
And so as we were kind of warming up, waiting for 7:30 to hit, or 6:30 your time, you know, we talked a little bit about how you're going into the hybrid mode now, and you've been virtual and you may go back to virtual. So how do you make this work, and how do you engage kids with this kind of thinking when we're in that virtual environment?
Yeah, honestly, it's not too much different. You would still post the quote and still ask kids to discuss it. You would just use breakout rooms instead of traditional groups or pairings that you would in a classroom. So just like normal, we would split kids up and have them engage in that target, and then bring them back and have a discussion as a class. Just in this case, it would be a virtual discussion on either Google Meet or Zoom or whatever platform you're using.
Right. So when we have the capability, which I think most schools do right now, we can do that synchronous collaboration where they can be in the breakout. And then I know in a little bit you've got some Jamboard examples to share. And also I might recommend Padlet as another great way, whether kids are on at the same time, or if, and by kids I'm going up to 18, but you know, they can put their stickies on and move them around and things as they build that understanding, and then you can help them to process it. Thank you.
All right, so continuing with this concept of helping the students gain clarity around where they're headed with their learning, specifically with writing. One of the things that ultimately you want to do is show students examples of success and have them co-create success criteria. So here you see that there is a model paragraph. It's an evidence-based body paragraph that would be in a DBQ. We're not going to look at an entire essay, but start with something a little smaller. It still has an argumentative statement and then is supported with evidence from sources. And there's a second example here, which you can't see on the screen, example B, and the students work in groups. And again, that could be in breakout rooms if you're virtual, or in groups in the classroom, to identify which one is the strong model, which one is the weak model, and then to identify the characteristics that make the strong model successful and strong. And so once the students do that in small groups, you can bring them back as a class, make a cohesive list of everything that they came up with, and then start to narrow that down into success criteria for students as they move forward in their document-based questions and argumentative writing. So here you see on the right-hand side of my screen, you see that there's a list that the class came up with in terms of the co-created success criteria. which matches beautifully with what all the standards went ahead and articulated.
I was going to say, if we click back to that slide a few slides ago, we see essentially this, but this is possibly in more clear language than if we grab each of those standards. And so what I heard is that you analyze those examples, and then the kids kind of help almost like brainstorm as many attributes or criteria as they can. And then you guide that piece where they're organizing and refining so that you narrow it down to these ideas that you may have in mind, but the kids really are coming up with what it is they need to do to be successful.
Yes. So they have a voice in the process, and right there, right, we're trying to create a democratic society for our students to live in, so giving them a voice is exceptionally important.
That's powerful. And it's something I can definitely say I did not do until much, much later in my career, but it made a huge difference. So we just talked a little bit about you're starting with standards, and then you're helping students really develop that understanding of what success looks like. So what is all this about teacher clarity?
Yes, so we're still focusing on trying to get students clear on our vision of success. So once they co-create the success criteria, that's not enough for me. I want to make sure that they see the success criteria in the example just like I see it. So I will ultimately take their list of success criteria and form a checklist for the students, and that's kind of what you see here on the screen. And I beef this up a little bit with what College Board's expectations are. It's definitely an adaptation from the College Board. And I assign a color to each success criteria, and then I ask the students to go ahead and highlight the strong model, which you see at the top, for each of the success criteria and where they live in the model. And then I can compare my highlighted example to theirs to make sure that they see what I see. But the step that I take that sometimes goes a little further is I also have them highlight the success criteria in the week work, because they're going to work with. I also think it's really important to show students a continuum of models, because sometimes they will overestimate their performance. And if you have a continuum of models, they can match their work to one of the other models and gives them a better sense of where they are and helps them refine their self-assessment. So another thing is we really want the students to not only answer the question of where are you headed, but how do you get there? So I like to put them in groups to have them work with the list of success criteria and the week model and talk about what would they have added to that paragraph so that it met all of the success criteria. And that's what you see at the bottom there, the plan for revision.
And so there I'm hearing the students engaging also in the feedback and the revision process to really dig into that pretty early in the learning. They've not yet written their own, and they're looking at these examples.
Right, we're trying to make them super crystal clear on the expectation before they dive in.
Right. And I wonder, if anybody wants to add a comment or jump on and share how that relates to your own experience as a learner. I know mine was, in social studies in particular, very different from that. And I often did well, but I had no idea why. And I honestly think now it's just because I had a relatively, as I can't think of a word, a relatively strong vocabulary, so that my writing may have sounded a little bit more informed as a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old. It's also making me think of, some of you know me and know that like Gina and Paul and some others that I see on here, I've spent a lot of my time with 5- and 6-year-olds and love that. And so even thinking to like community helpers or, these different big concepts that we study in the early grades and how directly they're related to a lot of these SEL skills, this same type of thing works. So when I taught kinder, we would have it's like a creative play station, but they would be acting out whatever community helpers they learned about, and they'd be practicing sentence stems and talking. So they're hitting a lot of skills, but a big piece of it was they had to basically practice out those criteria. And we would before I knew what we were doing, we were constructing criteria for what it means to be a community helper by watching little videos and reading lots of books and acting things out. And then another thing that made me think back to that is in all grades, that color coding of criteria is so powerful, because you're talking about AP work here. And I'm talking about 5-year-olds just getting started school. But when you can say, when I see this, that's the pink. When I see this, that's the green. It just gives you one more cue. And I love how it looks on the paper. You can see, I don't have any blues. Let's check back. What's a blue? Oh, I didn't add whatever, a justification of this for yours, or I didn't add how they help their neighbors in mine.
Yeah,
And, that's come up a lot lately too, is how do we do things like social studies in the virtual arena in lower grades? And I do think the power of those breakouts and things is helpful, but a lot of it is, being able to manipulate something, through an app like Seesaw or Pear Deck, and just being able to get on video and say what I'm thinking.
well, even in this case too, Isaac, you could easily have put the 2 examples on Google Slides and had the group highlight them in the Google Slides together in their breakout room. You could also use Pear Deck easily to facilitate this process, or even the Zoom annotation tool. So there's lots of ways to make this work.
Yeah, any company who didn't have some good options before March does now. So you can find them. And I see a couple of comments kind of reiterating some things I know that you and I shared about our own experiences in the past, which was a lot of social studies was memorization, kind of learn it, dump it on the paper, move on. And the better you were at that, the better you did, regardless of your mastery of concepts. So in the first couple of steps, kids have had a lot of opportunities to really get involved with these criteria and think about the concepts and skills behind these standards. So what's next?
Now they dive in. So after they have a super clear expectation of what's in front of them in regards to the document-based question, they actually engage in the DBQ, or at least in one evidence body paragraph, which can sometimes take a page. So we're talking about some lengthy writing. So they practice, they engage in the task. And right after that, we work on answering that question, where are you now? So to help students answer that question, we really want to give them a structure to provide effective feedback to each other. And one of the structures I love to use is the PQP, and it comes from Gloria Newbert, and it was kind of originated a long time ago now, but it means praise, question, and polish. So we want to teach students to make a statement that's grounded in the success criteria, that praises their peers' work, that also questions their peers' work in relationship to one of the success criterion, and that polishes their peers' work. So give them a suggestion to even make it better. The key here is that in order for the feedback to be successful and effective, it has to be grounded in that success criteria, which you've listed already and had them work with the highlighting.
Yeah, this is great. And a couple people are saying in the chat, they love this, and it's so similar to tag, tell, ask, and give a suggestion. Or in, Kinder, we love, and it works other grades, we love glow and grow. But it's all criteria based, as you said. And I think that's the key, because I tried for years to get my students, and this is in 5th grade and 4th grade too, but to really give effective feedback. And, we always say this, but if only I could go back, I just could not understand what I was doing wrong and why they weren't improving. And it's because they didn't know the criteria as well as the teacher did. And because they may have even had a rubric, but it wasn't the kind of rubric you're talking about. So they weren't empowered to give feedback on the criteria. They were just giving feedback on whatever they saw on the paper. And so this has really, been a game changer for me. And we've got a couple more ideas coming in, like 2 stars and a wish. It's a great thing to do. Here's 2 ways you met the criteria. Here's something I wish you'd try next, something I wish you'd consider. And then another good question, if we peek back, I'll reshare that. at this just for a second, then I'm going to unshare so we can see you. But what about this? How do we do this in this virtual world?
How do you teach kids to give effective feedback? Well, somebody asked earlier too, how do you model the learning? This is exactly where this would come in. Initially in the larger virtual setting with the whole class, I would model the process of giving effective feedback using those PQP stems to a student who would pretend to be model A or model B, because we already have those two models to work with. And then I would split them up into breakout rooms again and have them give the use the PQP form to give feedback to their peer. And I'd also emphasize that one of the really important things here is collaboration, because if we look at the concept of a democratic society in an interdependent world, which is part of the social studies purpose statement, this is necessary work to work with someone else to make something better.
Powerful. And so I'm hearing, because I know all educators right now are having to make decisions about how do I use this always valuable time, but this condensed time that I may have in a hybrid model, or in when I have, less synchronous time virtually, that this is something that, sure, maybe they can do it on their own after a while, but really because of that collaborative piece, this needs to be synchronous learning whenever possible, so that you can provide that feedback and guidance. And so they have those real-time conversations with their peer. Am I kind of getting that right?
Yes, and if we take the time to do this at the front end of the school year, right, and to do it really well, then the students are going to get really good at it by, about November, December, and their feedback is going to become super effective. You're actually going to make your job as the teacher easier and get them more feedback, which is only going to improve their work. So it pays, in the sense of imaginary money. It pays to invest in this at the front of the school year.
Many hands make light work, and now you've got, 30 other teachers per class, or however many. And then, when it isn't possible to have that synchronous time, that's sometimes where that power video comes in. So like you mentioned, you can act that out. Sometimes it's less real and it's more like a play, but that's still great because they get to hear your think aloud, and you stop and say, I'm going to look back at the criteria and see what they did well, and then tell. But, there's things out there like Flipgrid, which is free to teachers now. So you can go and make an account. I don't work for them or anything, but that way you can send out a video so they can see, here's my virtual fishbowl of me and someone else, working through this. And then peer to peer, if Katie and I are peers, I can make my video, submit, she can watch, comment, give feedback, and vice versa, if we're not able to be synchronous. But I'm definitely hearing that when possible, let's make this real so that conversation and collaboration is more authentic.
Right. And one of the steps to make sure that this is effective is actually providing feedback on feedback. So Isaac, if you wouldn't mind showing that example.
One of the segue.
Thank you. One of the things that I like to do at the onset is to get the students to write in the PQP form or whatever feedback structure you have in Google Docs, because then I can go right in and I can actually comment on the peer reviewers' comments to their peer about their peer's work. I know that sounds a little funny, but I need to give the peer reviewer feedback to make sure that their comments to their peer are actually grounded in the success criteria and are meaningful. And if I miss that step, right, that's when kids sometimes won't take the time to make their feedback grounded in the success criteria. So this is super important, but also super easy with the concept of Google Comments, which exists in that Google Suite.
Awesome. Yeah, this is another thing I was missing when I was beating my head against the wall, not figuring out why the feedback from child to child wasn't working. Well, I was not teaching them how to do it well. So learn from my mistakes.
And so now you get to that question, where to next? So they've answered through the peer feedback and the concept of just effective feedback in general, the list of success criteria. They've answered where am I now? And now we want to hold them accountable for applying that feedback to their work. So most students, especially in an AP course at the beginning of the year, have something to work on in regards to argumentative writing and analyzing sources. So I use the SMART goal format, really simple. And what I put more investment in than the goal itself is actually the action plan. And I will read these thoroughly at the onset of the year to make sure that the actions are high leverage, are related to the success criteria, and will get the students' actual work to be improved. And then I make them revise it. And that is part of the process of creating that assessment capable or empowered learner.
So after they've moved through all these phases, then they're setting the goal because they now know enough about themselves and about the criteria to take that step.
Yes. Yep.
Oops.
But as we started this conversation, right, Rome wasn't built in a day and it wasn't built in a week. This is a picture of Rome. But I remind my students of that. And so, you know, this is a rinse and repeat kind of concept. So every unit that we teach in an AP course has a document-based question, and they're going to face that on their AP assessment at the end of the year. And they'll face it in any history class, not just AP European history. So it's super important. And so we take the time at the onset to go through the entire formative assessment process and get good at giving feedback, because this will reappear in every single unit, just with different content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that image to remind us Rome wasn't built in a day. And we've got a couple more little things to share, but just want to check in and see if anybody's got any thoughts or questions. Or if anybody wants to jump in on the video or through the chat to share what they're wondering or what's working well for them. Right now, as we've got a few minutes left too, I'm especially interested for any of you who are on or who are watching through Facebook, what you're having success with right now. You know, what is working for your students? And it might be social studies, formative assessment process, related like the question we had earlier, using, you know, reflecting on social emotional learning, you know, or really this idea of peer power, empowering learners to take deep ownership of where they are in their learning and where they're going and how they're getting there. So any of those things you have, just send a quick message or raise your hand and we'll jump in with you. I know we did want to talk, we had a couple questions coming up about this, but just about a few more general ways that we can, you know, make this work for all learners. Because we know even as we go to hybrid or some of these schools who are back, you know, full force, there are still students everywhere who are staying home all year or staying home for a month or at least will be home for a week to 10 days to 2 weeks if they're exposed. So what are some other things, Katie, that you and your colleagues are seeing that are working? And we'll hear from some others too.
Yes, so some of the resources that we have at our fingertips are Jamboard, Padlet, Pear Deck. You mentioned Nearpod, Flipgrid. There are so many technological resources out there that can make our lives easier. Seesaw, as well as just the Google Suite in general. But I find that, you know, students need to learn these tools too. So you want to stick to a slight few and get them really good at it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have right now like a favorite, like something that you're finding, you know, here in high school, this is really, really working super well, or this has changed the game or anything like that?
Well, the Google Suite, the Google Docs lets you see in real time, right, what the students are working on in their groups. So that is super low tech and very, very easy to use. So I would say that I'm super dependent on. But one of the things I love is Jamboard. And Jamboard is, you know, also it's attached to Google. So it's easy to use and it allows each student to have a slide, and you can see them as they're working in real time. So you can actually provide feedback to the class as you see them working, or to just a specific student as you see them working.
Mm-hmm. Powerful, yeah. Kind of similar in some ways to Jamboard. I love Pear Deck, because it just adds a whole new level of engagement to our Google Slides, which so many people have been using for years, even before we were in hybrid or virtual models. But I think it's something powerful I heard is that you said G Suite because of blah, 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 blah. But you said like 2 or 3 ways, yeah, blah, 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 you're welcome. But 2 or 3 ways that it helps kids get and give feedback on the fly and helps them make those revisions. And I remember, this is going way back in the day, but as this first became available when I was teaching, the power of kids being able to get something down and make revisions without fear of losing everything, and knowing that like this is a living document. Because even when you say that on like a Word document, for instance, then when you change things, it's just kind of changed. But in Google Docs, the comments are so easy. Not to say they're not on anything else, but the comments are so easy there, and you can always undo your revisions. So I love that you picked something that works for that. We also had a couple of other things recommended. Sown to Grow. I know some of the schools and districts I work with now have had a lot of success using that to set goals and to really check in. And it ties in again that SEL piece to say, like, how am I feeling, not just about me right now, but how am I feeling about my learning or about how this learning's going, as well as Floop, which, is really built for feedback as well. And there's just so many good things out there. I think this week, my favorite is Padlet. Because of the ability to take and organize and move things around. But what's funny, Paul, who's on right now, he and I used it the other day, did not go real well. But I've used it a few times since then, and it worked really smoothly. And I honestly think what it is A, people need to know how to use it, of course, but B, people just need to be ready to engage and try it. And so I know you have this example you were going to maybe share with Jamboard. Want me to throw that up really quickly?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
And then we can talk about a couple more ways to do work in real time during the PQP stage. We had a great question about that. And I'd love thoughts on that from our other attendees as well. But I know Katie wanted to talk through this recent example.
Yeah, so this is just a quick example of how you could use Jamboard and also help students answer that question, where am I headed in my learning? It's not quite as time consuming as what I showed previously, but you could throw a political cartoon into a Jamboard slide. And you can ask the students, okay, if I wanted you to interpret this cartoon, what are the steps that you would take? What do you need to include in an interpretation? And they can use the sticky notes to go ahead and add the steps that they would take. And so that would serve as my co-creating of success criteria in a virtual space. Super easy. The whole class could see all the sticky notes, and then we would just narrow that down to just a small list of success criteria, and then we'd try it right there. Everybody would try their own interpretation on one of the Jamboard slides. So super easy.
So about how long does it take to set up something like this? Like if I've never used Jamboard, how much prep time to get these 4 pieces ready?
This took me about 5 minutes.
Okay. And I asked that partly because there's some things I've been using lately that are quick, and some things I'm staying up all night, working on formatting, but you kind of pop it up, you get it ready, and then clarify for me, how do the kids, like they respond on their own slide, you said, so how does that work?
So if you see down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, right, this 4th example, when you're ready to have them try it, they would just copy the slide. And so they would have their own slide in Jamboard. So I would see, like as a teacher, 22 slides that all look like that. And I'd see them start, adding, typing in it or highlighting or whatever I ask them to do. So I can immediately respond if need be.
Awesome. So then you're not only able to look at the individual, you can kind of see the collective and then
Yeah,
bounce
I can
through.
see
Right.
everybody. Mhm.
That's something I love about Pear Deck, as well as it lets me, kind of see on the teacher dashboard. I can see everything at once and then choose what to focus in on. And I know one thing that can be difficult for teachers who've got 150, 200, whatever students, or who have 30 elementary students with 5 different subjects, is trying to look through all these submissions. And if Facebook's taught me anything over the last few months, is that there's trouble out there in the world with those submissions. But then having a dashboard like this in the back is just so nice that you can see right away, there it is. They don't have that extra step where they can make a mistake, or put it off too long. And so we had a great question. I wonder if anybody else has any thoughts too, but how do you work in real time during that PQP stage? And I can click back to that slide if we want to pop it up for just a second too. But I want to share it for just a second, and then I want to unshare it so we can see you. But what are your thoughts on that?
How do you work in real time?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly what do you mean? Do you mean in terms of the virtual learning environment? You mean in terms of the classroom, the traditional way?
I think maybe a bit of both, but I was interpreting it to mean probably more in this virtual situation we're in. Like,
Okay,
how do you make this happen if, tomorrow we're doing this
sure.
at 9:15?
Sure.
How's it work?
Okay, so I would have the students bring their model paragraphs, and a trick I learned a long time ago is I always have some examples ready. So if they don't have one, I'm not excusing them from engaging in the success criteria, because even if it's not their own paragraph that they wrote, at least they will internalize the success criteria by having to find it in somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody gets a paragraph, and then what we would do is I would probably have them highlight the success criteria in a peer's work. So they swap paragraphs, highlight the success criteria and where it lives, and then go ahead and make a praise statement, write a question, and make a polish statement. And I would do that on a Google Doc. So initially, right, I could put them in independent breakout rooms and have them fill this out with their partner's example, looking at their partner's example. And then I would put them together after I would model out loud what the feedback looks like. So I would do that just in the virtual space, like kind of like we're talking right now. I would have, one kid be the receiver and I would be giving the PQP statements to them so that everybody could see me. And then immediately I'd break them out and have them go ahead and give the feedback that they just wrote on their paper.
Powerful. And the question was clarified because I was doing a bad job of of asking it, but you really hit on this. But she clarified by saying, how do you provide the students with immediate feedback during the lesson? So you just really hit on how you can get them engaged in giving the feedback and how you're modeling and coming back to revise. And I know you mentioned that feedback on feedback. So talk just a little bit about, let's say I'm giving my partner feedback that's inaccurate. Like, how would you know that? And then what would you be able to do in this virtual setting?
Yeah, so initially the first time that we're doing this, I like
Mhm.
them to fill the PQP statement out at perhaps the end of a class period, and then I
Mhm.
would look at it the night before they actually give their peer feedback, because I want to stop, right, the inaccurate feedback from getting to the
Mhm.
peer. And while they're learning the skill, it's necessary to do that, but eventually you don't have to do that anymore. So then I would put them in the breakout rooms, and the nice thing about Zoom, which is what I rely on, is that the students can flag you for help. So if they get stuck or have a question, you can hop in, but I also just hop in. So I will go from group to group and say, okay, let me hear what you got. And then go ahead and say, okay, well, how could we beef that up? Or that's a great suggestion to use disciplinary based vocabulary, but can you give for an example? So you do need to provide feedback on feedback, and that's how it can be done.
Powerful. Thank you. Yeah, and I love just the use of a Google Doc or Jamboard or any of these things we're talking about, where you can see at a glance, and because you've color coded it, I can go
Right,
very quickly and see at a glance. I see a lot of green. I don't see much blue,
exactly,
or whatever it might
exactly.
be. Or wow, you have a lot of blue here, but I don't actually see what blue should represent.
Right.
So as we wrap up, I know we had talked before we got together about, you said a few times, especially at the start, how the formative assessment process just fits, so beautifully with social studies. So let's kind of end. If anybody's got any thoughts or questions, please share those. But we started with your passion, so let's end again with your passion. Expand on that just a little bit.
Sure. So one of the advantages I feel social studies teachers have is that we can turn to a million disciplinary-based examples to actually teach these core practices. For example, Otto von Bismarck in 1862 gave his blood and iron speech to Germany, where he encouraged that they would meet their goal of getting stronger through war and industrialization. Well, right there, I can say, okay, we can see from patterns in history, right, that goal setting is relevant. And so I can tie that into the fact that we set goals in the social studies classroom. Revision, I can point to the Constitution. The initial Constitution was not ratified because the Anti-Federalists wanted more rights in it. And so that's how we got the Bill of Rights, and then it was ratified. So right there's revision to our Constitution. So again, easy ways for me to say, hey, this is important, and we've seen it happen time and time again in our discipline. And I could go on, but but I will not.
We'll do a 4-hour session on that sometime. Well, Katie, I want to thank you so much for doing this, and everybody who's joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live. And I'm going to share just a couple of ways that you can keep connected with us and some things to look out for. But while I do that, I want anybody who's on to think about this question for just a second, because this is how we're going to end today. And Katie doesn't know about this either, but I want you to think about one thing from your life that you would recommend. And it can be as simple as, like, I got these blue blocking glasses, which I'm not wearing right now because of the 4,000 lights I have in my room and how they reflect, but I can recommend them because I'm getting less headaches and I can sleep a little bit at night. So it can be something like that. It could be, I'm breathing, or wow, I love this coffee. It can be whatever you're thinking about, a new band. But I want anybody who's on, who's willing to share, what would you recommend? And I stole this idea from Michael Ian Black's no longer live, but podcast, How to Be Amazing, and just thought, what a cool way to wrap things up. So as always, you can join us here. You can scan that really quickly to find a lot of ways to keep in touch with us, and we hope you will. We are pumped about this and hope you'll join next week, the Teacher Success Summit. Chuck Poole's gathered over 100 amazing educators who have so much to share. Just Google that and you can sign up for free. Check it out. It's well worth it. A lot of us on right now are presenters on that, and it's all virtual, so you can check it out, from your home, your office. Super pumped. Very soon we're having Carolyn and Marisol dig into some great ideas about what it means to be restored and connected, and to really heal ourselves and our communities. Next month, we've got Jody Mills, who's going to dig into dispositional learning, which relates in many ways to what Katie shared with us as we develop ourselves as learners and teachers. We're pumped about our Empowered Learner e-toolkit, so kind of be looking for more about that. And as always, Star couldn't be with us tonight because she is working with our friends in the BOCES, but she helps organize our core chat, which Katie is a veteran of. We've got some great ones coming up. I'm doing November 10th. Hope you'll join. But they're all great. Just get on Twitter and search for #CoreChat. If you feel like you're not a Twitter person, reach out to Katie. She's a convert.
It's great. I like the Twitter chats.
Yeah, they're fun. We've got this awesome thing, Authored Inspired. Check it out. You get to hear interviews with authors, not just about their passion, but about how and why they write. And as Katie has shared, and as many of our questions tonight have brought to light, we need clarity at all times, especially now. We'd love to be your partner with that. We want you to keep in touch with us and keep this learning network thriving. Thank you for the comments. We're so glad to have you here and your great questions. But let's see, who's got something that they can share that's brought some joy to their life or some value to their life, just something you would recommend. Spending time with kids. Yes. It's so funny. We've done so many times to share gratitude in our own organization. Many of us travel a lot, and that's probably been number one is making sure to do that. I'll share well, I shared my glasses, but check out Cam Cole is an artist I learned about from watching a TV show, but he had a little guest appearance. And if you like any of Jack White's projects over the last, 15, 20 years, you'll probably like Cam Cole. Well, any parting words from you, Katie?
Thank you so much for having me tonight. It was great to talk about the empowered learners and the formative assessment process. Have a great night, everybody.